But you turned out to, of course, when you landed in the Pulitzer organization, that was a pretty good, I would think, a pretty good organization.
Same with Texas.
Yeah.
We've been very fortunate
Mm-hmm.
in the management, because I know of some that
Oh, yeah.
really just moved in for the money and nothing else.
Just stripped them out and moved on.
Mm-hmm. And I felt I have some personal friends who got caught in that.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with their talents or their abilities.
No.
Just had to do with money.
Nothing. What else is there? That's kind of what the game has become.
And you were in a position you were in a place to observe some of that.
Yeah, right.
And,
well, everybody who was around as long as we were, who was caught in that in some way, because it was just a part of the evolvement of the industry.
And you reflect back on when we first started and were owned by Coles, which had owned us for God knows how long. Nobody even thought about the station might be sold to somebody else.
No, and of course the FCC had a pretty tight rein on that
yes.
too.
Yeah.
And there was not much latitude for doing that within the limits.
And I can't believe, back then, Coles owned KRNT and KSO, and was ordered by the FCC to split up. You couldn't have two stations in the same
KSO.
under the same ownership in that market.
Yeah.
Now I see they have up to half a dozen or a dozen stations under the same ownership, with different formats and
Exactly.
and satellite transmission and all that.
Right.
And what a huge change that was.
And it's continuing, right? Well, Aaron and I were talking about at lunch is Clear Channel, which owns the largest number of stations in Des Moines now, they're an ownership group of about 500 radio stations.
Is that right?
So
I didn't realize
that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But that's where it's going. Of course, radio was just totally deregulated by the Act of '96.
It's kind of like the airline industry. It had some good points, but it also had some bad points.
It certainly has not, I don't think, has been very good for broadcasting. But little editorials going on here, Paul.
And secondly, I think the fact that, as we did, we were permitted to own both radio and television in the same market. Television always got the major share of everything, and radio had to beg.
Yeah.
And as a result, radio was not utilized very well during that period when everybody was leaping into television.
No, it wasn't. Well, of course, radio has become a totally different animal than it was originally. You mentioned a name that was very, very big on KRNT, and that's this man, Bill Riley. How do you remember Bill? I know he was in a very different part of the operation than you were, but...
Yeah, he was, it was different, but in those days, way back, we were so small that everybody was close.
Sure.
And Bill was, in my memory, was one of the most enthusiastic persons I have ever known, both on the air and just generally, and made a tremendous business success out of what at one time was just telephone calls to give away money and heading up cartoon shows.
Right.
And all these talent shows and all that he got into as an extra duties. He is an example of the American dream of taking, not because he had no special, he couldn't sing, couldn't dance, couldn't do anything like that. All he did was know how to talk to an audience, particularly of kids.
Right.
And he was something else.
He
still is.
Had to be a remarkable personality to have the. He was kind of the Pied Piper, wasn't he? With that, used to get him lined up all the way around the KRNT theater. That come down to watch that kids show that he did.
The Hey Bob show.
The Hey Bob show.
And I'll tell you, that's another thing that occurred during radio that has never occurred in television. For instance, Don Bell, a couple times a year, would have a live radio show at the KRNT Theater,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd have 4,000 or 5,000 people,
Yeah.
as you say, lined up. and Bill Riley would have his Hey Bob show on Saturday,
Yeah.
and would have the theater full of people. And that just doesn't happen much anymore.
He still has Hey Bob. When we did the interview with him, he had Hey Bob sitting on the couch beside him.
Did he really?
Right. He's
That was a huge kids show, and times change.
They do, but again, as you say, sometimes, and you kind of made an important. I know that I used to struggle with the WMT was a stronger radio station.
Yes.
Than KRNT was, because again, it was a big regional station.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the radio people just were harping at us all the time because we were paying too much attention to television, and we operated for a number of years in the same way you did. We ran both television and radio out of the same newsroom. But a lot of hard choices to make there.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But do you know that, particularly in the beginning days, radio was more fun
Oh, it's always been more fun.
because there wasn't so much money involved,
Yeah.
so that if you made a mistake, you didn't bankrupt the company.
Right.
And it was a fun medium
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
And later on, it turned out to be a drag.
I don't think it's much fun anymore
No.
in most places, but it certainly was. And you know, those, well, you and I obviously would think those are the glory days, but I kind of
Yeah.
think they were, Paul. I kind of think. Any regrets about how you cast your lot here?
No, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, I want to get out of Iowa.
Yeah.
I'm tired of Iowa," because I had no Iowa connections whatsoever,
Uh-huh.
and was anticipated heading back out to the Pacific Northwest. And then we got the television, and then grew like crazy.
Yeah.
So I stayed here, but I have grown to like Iowa immensely.
Mm-hmm.
And with all its problems, particularly right now, it still is a wonderful place
Yeah.
to raise a family, and I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. I'm glad I didn't do what I anticipated doing. That was move to a major market. Like I was going to go to Minneapolis and,
Yeah.
and move on up the ladder to the big station.
Well, that's one route, but I think this was a pretty good place to work through a news career, and I think
Yeah.
you're a living example of that. Yeah.
And the fact that television was just starting.
Yeah.
So you had a chance to take part of that whole
You were right on the ground floor.
beginning.
Yeah.
And but other than that,
Well, it's a joy to have had this visit with you and to have your kindly reflecting on your great colleague Russ Van Dyke and the mark the two of you made here, along with your other colleagues in the news business.
yeah, if there was any one thing I'd say that was responsible for the success we had, it was the fact that the only place in the country where your 6 o'clock and your 10 o'clock anchors stayed with a station for 40 years. It just doesn't happen anyplace else. And I don't care. Gordon Gammick's a good example. Didn't matter that he couldn't read worth a damn. Didn't matter that he had a terrible voice. People knew Gordon, liked Gordon,
Yeah.
and wanted to listen to Gordon.
Right.
And the same with us. They knew us, and we'd been around. And we became household names, and anybody else could have done it also that it stayed 40 years.
Well, maybe, but that's again, you're a very modest person, but there certainly is. One of the things that Iowans like is stability, and some of the great mistakes that were made in this business were when some wise guy decided to get rid of the weatherman or something,
Yeah.
or an anchor that had a kind of a funny delivery, and all of a sudden they discovered they'd grabbed a hornet's nest.
Yeah. Along those lines, let me just throw in that consultants came in about halfway through our careers and greatly influenced what television did and didn't do, and I think had a very salutary effect on a lot of things, but also guaranteed that across the country, every newscast was going to look just alike.
Yeah.
Because they would take out what was good, spread it around all their stations, and pretty soon everybody was looking the same.
Yeah.
If you were in San Francisco, it looked just like you were in Des Moines.
Whether or not it was good, it was what was selling, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
No, I wouldn't say the consultants were the most positive influence that that wafted through those 40, 50 years, but they were there along with all the rest of it. Well, Paul, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
a great interview
It's
and for recalling your career here.
It's been a pleasure, Grant, because the two of us went kind of parallel paths for years and years and years.
We did. We had, and never crossed very much because, well, you were a CBS affiliate. We were, well, of course, we did for a while when WMT was a CBS, so we had more contact then in those years. Anyway, it's been a great pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thank you.